I was with a group of kids, maybe, I think there's 4 of us, and one of the individuals, father and family were wrestlers, and there was no youth wrestling at Beachwood, Ohio. Ironically, the youth program at that time was the Heights YMCA. So I went to the Heights YMCA to start wrestling, and had no experience. My father wouldn't know wrestling from football. But that was my start in wrestling. It was just this group of 4 or 5 Beachwood kids, and I liked it. When I was in 7th grade, Beachwood was 7th through 12th grade in one building. So as a 7th grader, I was going to school with seniors. That was normal for me because that's all I knew. And I had an opportunity to wrestle with another 7th grader, and that year both of us wrestled JV, and we also wrestled JV in 8th grade. Another wrestler was a guy named Doug Weiss, who eventually went to US and became a 2-time national prep school champion. Not too shabby, but we all started at Beachwood. Memory's a slippery thing, you know. Whatever you remember, it's a distortion of what really happened, and we edit as we go back, especially when you get older. But my recollection is that the rules did not allow Doug and I to wrestle JV. But Coach I let us wrestle JV, but each match was a forfeit. But it allowed us to wrestle, you know, I remember wrestling, you know, juniors and seniors, and, you know, I was getting crushed. But it was fun. I think when Coach I became the wrestling coach, I think it was an informal program before then, wrestling with these guys who are 18 years old. And Coach I, now I was a history major, so my math isn't so good, but I think he was about 14 years old too. He looked like he was 14. He was this little guy filled with energy, typical boomer. I'm not going to talk about the fact that we only had 3 TV stations and all that stuff. I'm not going there. But I will tell you, when we started wrestling, there was no wrestling room. We didn't have these beautiful mats. We had, you know, what I call tumbling mats that had a cover. And every practice, we had to set that up in the cafeteria. That's where we wrestled. And we had to put this up and take it down every day. So that's how I got into all of this. There was a big rivalry between Richmond Heights High School and Beachwood at that time. And they had a good program. And the head coach at Richmond Heights, I think, was a friend of Coach I's, Coach Paporis. The neurons are working today. It was my senior year, and big rivalry. We were wrestling at Richmond Heights, and the gym is filled. The 2 schools that would fill gyms for wrestling was Beachwood and Richmond Heights. I mean, other schools did, but we could fill a room. I even, in 9th grade, as president of my class, I organized an after wrestling match dance, which was unheard of. You did those after basketball, but we had a lot of kids. So, okay, I'm at Richmond Heights, big rivalry, and I'm wrestling who I think might have been the captain of their football team. He was like the fair-haired child of Richmond Heights. He was beloved. And, you know, I thought he had a big attitude. And, you know, that didn't play right with me. I didn't think he was all that. During the match, kind of took him apart. And then I even, during a very tense moment in the match, I smiled and laughed at him. Crowd went crazy. I was like the bad guy in a big-time wrestling arena. They were just screaming for blood, my blood. You know, he went crazy when I did that. The match is over. I looked over because Coach Paporis knew me, I knew him, and I see he's being restrained by his assistant coaches. He wants to charge on the mat and like beat me up. This is a wrestling term. You don't have to be a dick. You could be a good winner. You can certainly be a good loser. And I think you should learn both those traits when you wrestle, being a good winner and being a good loser, because you're going to lose too. And one of the great things about wrestling is that when you lose a match, first of all, you feel terrible that you've lost. But if you think to yourself, I worked as hard as I could, Maybe I just met a better wrestler. I just have to accept the fact that lost this match, there's another match next week, and you move on. And those are the type of lessons that you apply later in life. Don't be a dick, number one. Be a good winner, be a good loser. The only thing you can do is prepare, give your best effort, even professionally. As a lawyer for over 40 years, and an acting judge for over close to 25 years, those are the types of things that I applied in my profession. Prepare, do your best. Can't win every case, not supposed to. Sometimes you meet a wrestler who's just better than you, but you've worked hard. And those are, going forward, the lessons that you take with you. Although wrestling is an individual sport, we talk about this all the time. You get on the mat by yourself. But really you don't. When you get on the mat, you're getting on the mat with your coaches, number one, your teammates, number two. I mean, it's you on the mat by yourself, but without that type of support, and maybe your family support, really there's no way you're going to be successful. I was friends with Ronnie Madow. Ronnie was probably one of the first success stories in terms of career, and I think Ronnie was someone I really looked up to. But that whole group of wrestlers, a guy named Jim Rosenblatt, I remember the Belfiore brothers, those names come to mind. But to say, is there any single wrestler? I don't think so. I think it was just more of the culture. He was a big influence on all the wrestlers, I think. Certainly me. I was not, I don't think I was an easy guy. Well, I think there were other guys who were challenging. Lauren Rabnick. But in a good way, and what a great guy, by the way. But you had in that time period to be able to challenge this guy Kraus, who is strong thinking, but he's all over the place. What does it take from a coach to keep me committed? And I think Coach I was so successful is because in a lot of ways he did it by example. I can sit and tell you, be a good guy, don't be a dick, whatever I tell you. If I'm not acting that way, it's just hypocritical and the lessons are lost. So I think he was always the real deal. He talked the talk, but he walked the walk. If he needed to tell you something you didn't want to hear, he would do that. But the way I felt he kept me in the game, in retrospect, at the time, 16, 17 years old, no frontal lobe development, you're all over the place in a time of social upheaval. How did he do it? Well, he did it with compassion. He was understanding. He could be a tough taskmaster, and those are the things that really, I think, distinguish himself with me. And I know he's done that with others. And, to talk about, the success of the program, we're sitting in this beautiful wrestling room, you look at the walls, and the success speaks for itself then. He formed young people, and he formed future coaches who also had great success. When Coach I left Beachwood, his first retirement, is this like his 15th retirement? We may do this 20 years from now, and I don't know if I'll be here, but I think Coach I will be here, retiring yet once again, and at least I hope so. And it wasn't just the best wrestlers in the room. Coach I took time with all his wrestlers. That's my memory, and that he was even-handed, and you were going to get an easy ride from him if you were doing well. In fact, maybe he was going to ride you harder. The thing that I think about with Coach I, who was a young man, he's entering a program that really has no program. You can't have an informal wrestling program. It just doesn't work that way. So here he comes in and takes on this job, this role to be the head wrestling coach, where there's no history of wrestling. Mid to late 60s and into the 70s, there's a cultural tsunami taking place. We're seeing things that we've never seen before. If the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, a boomer reference, in 1964, by 65 it was peace, love, and happiness. Drugs were rampant. It was a really a different time. Rebelling youth. 68 was the Chicago Democratic Convention, which ended up being a big riot. There was still compulsory service. The draft was on at that time. Vietnam was taking place. I think Tet was in 67. Tet was a huge offense of time in the Vietnam War where many, many people died. So this was a time of turmoil and revolution, and here you have Dominic Imerino trying to convince a group of teenagers that you should be wrestlers. And he was successful. He got a core group of people. And I remember being with these guys, people like Bob Bloom, Lauren Rabnick, Jim Rosenblatt. To take on the role as a head coach where there's been no program, I don't understand how you even think to do that in a sport that is so punishing in a good way, you hope, where there's other sports that people could engage in or other things that they'll do. But Coach I had that ability, that charisma. After my accident, I really missed out on a lot of wrestling. And life goes on, and finishing school and law school and family, all those great things. And I just didn't feel comfortable coming to see wrestling. So I missed a whole generation, maybe 2 generations of great wrestlers that were from Beachwood, Ohio. Heard about them. But then my son, my middle son, was 9 years old. He was a very good athlete. He was an excellent hockey player. I think he had heard a lot of people talk about wrestling around me. And he said, well, I'd like to try wrestling. So we came to Beachwood to the youth program, the elite program. I think he might have been 9. So a late starter for his generation, maybe. When I walked into the wrestling room, it was a more open space then, the years just melted away. And I saw Coach I, and I saw Ronnie Madow and Lauren Rabnick and Barry Guinness, who was from that original class of wrestlers, all there, coaching. And I thought I was like caught in some science fiction time loop. And where am I? This is like I've returned, from where I started. And I was with my son. It doesn't get any better than that. And I got to renew old friendships. It certainly cemented my connection to the wrestling community. And I made great new friends, like a guy named Scott Peters and Ryan Peters, and how they took Alex under his wing. But everyone helped everybody. And I thought, this is so great. In some ways, I regret having missed out on all the great wrestlers. And I look around and I know some of these guys. I remember, I think Jordan Lipp was on a tear. This is in the early 2000s, I think, in my son's wrestling. And Jordan would takedowns with my son, which, was just great, because that's what wrestlers do, And so we're driving home. I said, well, this is a great day, Alex. He says, why? I said, you took down Jordan Lipp. He said, yeah, I did. Of course, Jordan had let him. But, that type of experience. So coming back to wrestling is something that in the community was just beyond great. So just wrestling overall as a culture and what it's done for me, and I think it's done for others, is that when you've been in the program, regardless of your success, if you've been a wrestler, well, then you're part of this select group, because most other athletes you talk to, whatever they do, you mention wrestling, many will just say, those guys are crazy. You gotta be crazy to wrestle. And I always saw it as a calling, and it's hard to leave something that you're called to. And I see that professionally, if I'm in a matter where I'm dealing with a guy who I can immediately tell is a wrestler, you can almost tell when they walk in the room, like 2 dogs, I can be much more frank in my discussions, and we can get to issues much more quickly. We don't always agree, but I think this is part of wrestling. In 1975, I was in this accident and I was sidelined for a while. And when I came back home after this accident, a lot of wrestlers came to visit me, and Coach I came to visit me. And some of these people were younger than me, didn't really know me. It was just the support of the wrestling community and Coach I. And those were tough times for me, but it was the lessons I learned in wrestling that I believe pretty much saved my life. Let me know that I could push myself physically beyond whatever I thought I could do, because that's something that you learn in wrestling. You think you hit the wall, and you find a way to break through it. Without wrestling, I don't think I would have had that ability. Just this morning, I was going to the gym, because that's what, I don't know, old wrestlers do. I see a guy I know, and he's walking out, and it just happened this morning. And he says to me, just not feeling it today. I'm just going to go home. And immediately in my head, I think, not a wrestler, because if you show up, you're going to start. There are plenty of days I didn't want to come to practice, even after we had a real wrestling room, but I always went to practice, didn't miss practice. And once you start, you get into it and you're doing it. This is some of the advantages that wrestling gives you. It's just the basics. You watch, like in my generation, Dan Gable was the GOAT, right? 3-time NCAA champion. People don't remember is that in 1972 was the Munich Olympics, the Munich massacre. But the Olympics took place. And Dan Gable, who really had no experience as a freestyle wrestler, he goes to the Olympics that year and he wins a gold medal. Now, part of freestyle wrestling is sometimes you give points to get points. No one scored a point on him. That is unheard of. That's like pitching 5 perfect games. So he did it with basics. If you watch what he does single legs and double legs. But he executes them so perfectly that you can't stop it. So I would say to a new wrestler, take a deep breath. Everything you've done in your practice room with your teammates is what's going to carry you through. Listen to your coach and do the best you can. It's all you can do. And don't look back. Enjoy the moment.